contemporary, as you say. You are all welcome. Thank you for the opportunity. Just 2 remarks. I was infected by the optimism and patriotism of the convener when we met, and I think I want to present him as a model of how professionals and intellectuals should care about their country. So once again, I commend you for your efforts. I also want to thank the real guest speaker who will come after me, the former governor, my comrade. The last time I spoke, sir, somewhere you gave me an advice about culture and protecting ourselves, and that advice, I have made sure I didn't make reference to those things anymore. Thank you very much, comrade. Okay, so I'll just go straight to my speech. I start by saying that every nation passes through a phase. Nigeria is passing through a phase. What matters is the nature of the phase and where the country was before the phase. Crisis is not a terrible thing. It always depends on how we deal with crisis. This is why it is said that a crisis is a great thing to waste. May Nigeria not waste the current crisis. May we use it to correct the faulty foundations and build anew a strong and better institutions for economic and political development. There are 2 extremes a country and its people should avoid. First, they should avoid excess pessimism. Things are bad, but they are never irredeemable. A country and its people have to avoid also excess confidence. We are blessed with abundant resources and a talented people, no doubt. But resources and talent do not guarantee success. Nations are a human creation. They do not emerge packaged by God. They are the work of committed leadership, mobilizing a passionate people determined to make their lives better. So all people in the world are loved by God. It is not only Nigerians who are loved by God. There is a universal divine benevolence. God has blessed all nations. The destiny of nations, therefore, depends on how ultimately the leadership and the people utilize those blessings intentionally to create good. So I would look at Nigeria past, present, and said, we've done well, we've stumbled, but we can do better. And this is a moment for us to actually do better. Okay. I start also with optimism that we should maybe reject the instinct to talk down on a country. Speaking ill about our country may look realistic, but it's not good. And I have the authority of the only black Nobel economist, Arthur W. Lewis, who actually advised Nkrumah many years ago. And he said that economic development also depends on attitude, perception, and the belief you have about yourself. So oftentimes, negative thoughts constitute a self-reinforcing prophecy. They develop and become like reality. So that's why all great nations in the world, whether you look at East Asia or you look at Europe, the Industrial Revolution, you look at the US under Alexander Hamilton, they always come with a high dose of optimism and belief that they will get it right. Nationalism and patriotism and economic development oftentimes are tied together. So whereas we should be critical, like some of us who are critics, but we should never be utterly pessimistic because it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. This paper argues that at this point in Nigeria, we need a social compact, what I call a social compact. A social compact actually helps define the direction. A leading political economist in the United Kingdom, Stefan Dacom, in his recent book called Gambling on Development, Why Some Win and Some Lose, argues that the most important determinant of economic development is that ability of the ruling elites to agree on a development agenda. He called it development bargain. A development bargain does not mean that there is no political disagreement. It does not mean there is no acute conflict over political power. It does not mean that everyone agrees with the same set of ideas and policy suggestions. It simply means that the ruling elites in the country have decided that they will commit themselves to development. The lack of this consensus for development may be the greatest setback for our country, and the real impetus we need to begin and fast-track this journey to real and sustained development. This development consensus or elite consensus requires the engagement and support of citizens. This means that we need to develop a social compact or agreement between Nigerians and their leaders and their citizens, and such social compact will become a national value system, a national development attitude, and a national commitment to unity and progress. That is why the National Orientation Agency is critical, and that's why we should support the government in trying to create ethical orientation towards the nation state. Now, I will briefly talk around what I think this social compact that I'm proposing should look like. And I start with Nigeria in the past. It's important to know that Nigeria once embodied hope. I saw the 1960 Time magazine cover. It was on Nigeria. And it was written boldly, "The hope for the black world." So Nigeria's birth heralded hope. There was reasonable expectation that Nigeria will very soon take its rightful place as an African economic and political superpower. This hope was disappointed. Less than half a decade of independence, Nigeria fell into avoidable crisis that led to military takeover and ultimately to the Civil War. The failure of leadership at that time destroyed democratic governance and ultimately destroyed millions of lives of Nigeria in an avoidable civil war. Professor Wole Soyinka located the root of that crisis that led to the Biafran War and the Civil War at the doorstep of the failure of the rule of law and the rule of law institutions in Nigeria. In his prison memoir, The Man Died, Professor Soyinka argues that Nigerian leaders failed to uphold the rights of ordinary Nigerian citizens who were victims of mass violence. So the failure of the Nigerian First Democratic Republic to enforce the rule of law and protect fundamental rights of its citizens, guaranteed by the Constitution, set up the House of Straw that we later, some people think we are. But Nigeria survived that war, but did we learn the lesson? Or are we learning the lesson? So military rule came and compounded the problem. Civilian rule that followed after, some people were still now trying to rebuild the foundation. In 2015, we made a big progress by having for the first time a government, civil government, replace civil government without a coup, without war. So Nigeria entered into democratic consolidation. So it's not all bad news. In 2015, there was a phenomenal milestone that we can transition to a new government without fighting. Look at Burkina Faso, look at Niger, look at Mali. So we have some things to be grateful. So again, yes, we fought a civil war, which is a failure, but we also showed strength. Nigeria is the first country in the world that finished the war and quickly came back to restart the journey of nation building. That level of resilience is uncommon in the history of wars. If you look at Bosnia, if you look at everywhere in the world, civil wars that took over 5 million, expected 5 million, would have taken years, several small skirmishes. But the Nigerian resilience shows that something about us that is light-hearted, that is decent people, generally speaking. We came back. Our challenge is to build on that. Now, the Nigeria of today, so the Nigeria of past was mixed grill. We had great opportunities, we stumbled, but ultimately we recovered. The Nigeria of today, the present, is a Nigeria where we are faced with 3 major crises. The first is the crisis of poverty, which relates to the crisis of production and value. 2, insecurity, which was a recent phenomenon from 2014, became much more serious. And thirdly, lack of political commitment, loss of public trust. So that's why we are today. We are doing badly in poverty, multidimensional poverty, about 153 million Nigerians. About 36 million Nigerians are predicted to probably go hungry in 2024. But we can reverse all that. How about the future? 2 facts are clear about Nigerian politics. The first is that the quality of Nigerian politics as it is cannot resolve the deep social and political crisis of Nigeria. These crises are basically the crisis of social justice, 1, the crisis of productivity, and the crisis of public ethics. The crisis of social justice has 2 aspects, what we call the nationality crisis. Who are we? Can we just be one and move together? 2, the state religion crisis. How do we structure a balance that allows us as religious people, but at the same time allow this a secular state organized in a secular democratic manner? This crisis started from the beginning. In 1959, at the conference in London, it was discussed. We had some agreement. In 1979, we had discussions. So a nation is a work in progress, as I'll get to that point. So the first problem is, can our politics transform these contradictions and crises? The second, and the bigger crisis I see, is that our politics somehow seems to reinforce these problems. So only a radical transformation of our politics will help us permanently avoid this crisis. And these 2 facts is what inform my idea of a social contract or a social compact as a programmatic framework to transform Nigerian politics from an instrument of predation and violation of rights to an instrument of freedom and prosperity. And we are at that point now. This government has signed the Electricity Act, which gives states more power. We've seen constitutional amendment. We are hearing about restructuring. We are seeing, so those are aspects of this transformation. But we need to go deeper, and that's what the paper is trying to say. Okay. So I argue that in the context of democracy and development in Nigeria, the most urgent work in Nigeria today is both institutional and cultural. At the level of institution, it is the work of reversing the march to state failure through a reinvention of the structure and quality of governance institutions and the reactivation of the productive capacity of the state. At the cultural or ideal level, is the creation of a real compact between the Nigerians and their state, a compact that guarantees to the Nigerian the confidence and assurance that the Nigerian state exists for the purpose of promoting his or her social and economic well-being and protecting his or her freedom and dignity. This guarantee must be real and enforceable, not merely rhetorical. The restoration of social compact is in both concrete and ideological terms is the first challenge of new politics in Nigeria. Therefore, in concrete terms, the hope for a prosperous and just Nigeria rests on changing the character of politics through a different political economy built on the foundation of citizenship. That is, citizenship as a bundle of rights. The rights in Chapter 2 and 4 of the Nigerian Constitution, all of them, civil, political, economic, cultural, are the programmatic framework to build a public governance that will deliver prosperity and freedom for all Nigerian people. Unfortunately, from 1979, these rights have been pronounced as judicially unenforceable. So it's an appeal that as we're doing constitutional reform, we should please consider to make those rights enforceable. You can't deal with poverty without creating entitlements. If you look at elsewhere in the world, citizens have entitlements, economic and social cultural, that they will use to deal with poverty. So I think it was an error in our constitutional draft in 1979 and in 1999 that we, under Section 13, we said these fundamental objectives are binding on public officers. And Section 6, we say they're not enforceable. That should be corrected. It will help the government to deliver the agenda they have. So I look at the fundamental values of this social contract I'm talking about, and we're getting to the heart of it. The social contract I'm talking about should be built on core values and fundamental principles that define the programmatic trust. These principles underline commitment to provide a social basis of dignity and freedom for every Nigerian and the resident of Nigeria, and also provide political stability that will sustain the dignity and freedom. The compact should be guided by the following fundamental value. 1, a legal system that is rule of law, duly enacted and implemented fairly. 2, an open society that promotes the freedom, dignity, and equality of all citizens. 3, a modern economy that rewards productivity and innovation and discourages rent-seeking and dependency. 4, a democratic society that is republican and right-based. 5, social security network that provides for disability, distress, and disadvantage without undermining the incentive for production. And 6, a public sector that is efficient, accountable, and transparent. Now, what are the fundamental issues that will define this compact? The fundamental values that should define it are already in Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which we call the Fundamental Objectives and Directive Principles of State Policy. Typical, not of this government or any particular one, of Nigeria way of doing things. We like tokenism. Tokenism means that you bring something that's important, put in your law, but you fail to activate it. That our Chapter 2 is fantastic framework for social development. But we are not implementing it. So although Nigerian citizens are divided on several issues, they are all agreed that we should operationalize Chapter 2 of the Constitution. So if we use it, we can make it the heart of this social compact. Now, social compact is built on what I call democratic citizenship. It solves the problem of nationality, that all Nigerians see that the country and the state protect and build their well-being. And therefore, the notion of East, West, North, and South, or ethnicity will be less so. In fact, scholars argue that ethnic competition arises mostly where people feel that the scarcity and that distribution will be skewed against them based on non-legal basis, non-objective. Once people are assured that processes and resource allocation will be based on objective and fair grounds, there will be less resort to ethnicity. We talk about social welfare and extreme poverty. We need to have this. We can't address poverty. And by the way, why is it that countries in the world, if you look at the poverty profile in the world, you see less poverty, inequality in Asia when we're growing? Why? Because their mode of production and the economy was more inclusive. And so we talk about inclusive growth. The basis for that is those objectives. What does that mean? It simply means, for example, that if you have a society where people have access to healthcare, where women can have free prenatal or natal care, it simply means that you're reducing poverty, because apart from income, you are providing for them enablements, capacities that constitute multi-dimensional poverty. Now, I want to focus more on economic growth and industrialization, because this government is committed to economic growth and have rolled out several policy instruments to drive growth, especially with those, I think 2-3 weeks ago, the president rolled out some of those initiatives to support small and medium enterprises and to promote industrial development. So I argue that in order to sustain economic welfare and social security for Nigeria, the economy must be growing at a sustainable rate. Chapter 2 of the Constitution commits Nigerian leaders to ensure economic growth. The social contract that we're proposing require elected officials at national and sub-national level to fast-track economic growth through diversification. So apart from being the largest economy in Africa, we are there. Now we are fourth after South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria. Or at least by the end of this year, we are supposed to be fourth, but we are first. But apart from being first, we should be the fastest growing economy because of tremendous untapped human and natural resources. In order for economic growth to result in drastic poverty reduction through creation of millions of new paying jobs, The contract requires that we prioritize rural industrialization. Since there is high poverty in the rural communities in Nigeria, cottage industries in the 775 local governments area in Nigeria will be a high priority. This compact prescribes growing the economy through a combination of smart policies that encourage strategic private and public investment in industrial and service sectors. Learning the lessons of failed import substitution policy in Africa does not mean that we don't appreciate the benefit of robust public sector engagement with industries and industrialization. Asia did it. Let's stop talking down on the public sector. The public sector has to play a role to drive industrialization, not private sector. Asia, government created the big groups of companies that drove so the idea that the public sector cannot be involved is not correct. So what are the initiatives? I propose some. First, full mobilization of Nigerians under condition of full employment of all natural and human resources for economic development. The Nigerian state will be a developmental state that mobilizes every Nigerian for enterprise. Two, refocusing economic development from oil and gas multinational to micro and medium enterprises that are locally owned and providing goods and services for local consumption and export. We should no longer suffer under the trauma of a disarticulated economy that is externally directed via oil and gas business. Three, focus on public taxation and social sector expenditure in order to overcome rent-seeking and engender an ownership society where citizens have stakes in protecting democratic governance. A comprehensive progressive tax system, tax system backed up with transfers to meet social obligation should form the basis of expenditure revenue for massive infrastructure and social development and a rich functional citizenship. Four, support entrepreneurship through removal of bottlenecks to competitiveness through sound micro and macroeconomic policies. The compact should mandate governments at state and local area to create wealth by mobilizing and capacitating the private sector through policy environments that make operations competitive and productive. I talked about youth development. Government is doing well with the youth policy. We need to connect the youth development policy to digitalization because global hunt for jobs requires people who are smart with skill. I would like to propose that we shouldn't leave the educational curriculum the way it is today. Our curriculum is not suited for 21st century technological innovation. Not university, primary school. We should be teaching butterflies, teaching people about grasshopper at small age. They should be taught about the chips, about the things that are now relevant for knowledge economy and productivity. The new century is a century of global competition for talents. We've moved from big armies to smart armies. Look at the war in Ukraine. Drones are doing more than battalions and artillery. So we should move in that way. I want to end, because a lot of things to say, but because of time, and of course, I know that my senior comrade will beautify everything. Now, let me make this very clear. Nigeria is a great nation. Our Nigerian leadership is not more corrupt or more incompetent than any other leadership in the world. There are no saints in any country. Countries grow and become great because of the intersections of three things. First, resources. We have that. It can be natural or human. Two, how they interpret moments in history and use them to catalyze redirection. And I give you three examples and I sit down. First, take South Korea. By the time South Korea started with General Park in 1960, their per capita was nowhere near Nigeria. It was a country that was trapped, coming away from Japanese colonization. They didn't have much hope. Three things worked for them. Number one, they had a military leader who had a developmental agenda. That means even though they may be corrupt, even though they may be particularistic, but they want to develop their country. That's the overriding. And General Park started this revolution. 2, they were lucky not to accept the neoliberal agenda of development of markets and built on the same agenda that Professor Frederick List wrote in 1885. He called it the National Economy Plan. He argued, the Germans argued, that the only way to grow an economy is to grow it as a national institution. Americans borrowed it by Alexander Hamilton, and that's why America developed. No nation has developed through neoliberal agenda of market. Government has to step in and shape the direction of economic growth. General Park got that right. 2, China. China was struggling with dictatorship until 1978 when Deng came in. And Deng did a fantastic work. Simple thing. He didn't destroy the party, the Communist Party. He simply said, our focus is wealth creation. And we're going to use the model of the market, but use it in a different way to emphasize the Chinese characteristics. Today, by 2002, China's per capita GDP was less than Nigeria. Today, greatest economy in the world. Finally, I talk about Taiwan. Today, Taiwan sits as the headquarters of chips in the world. Supplying, that's why the fight over Taiwan is stiff between China and the US. It was insignificant, but a few scholars came from the US, and a political party won election and recreated that agenda. Nigeria can be like these countries. It takes current leadership, the party in power. It's a privilege to be a party in power. It's a privilege to be the one leading the people. But that privilege is a responsibility. I want to argue and conclude by saying a nation is always a work in progress. But how we do that work determines what the nation turns out to be. We must admit that we have not been doing a good job since 1960. We've done some good, we've done some evil. We've done some terrible results. But we shouldn't argue with the results. The results tell us that we've not done a good job. We can interrogate the results to look for explanation. But the result is telling us, not this government, not the previous one, but collectively over history, we've not maximized our opportunities. The good news is that Nigeria can still has the resources to succeed. Nigeria can still succeed. There is no fatalism about state building. Every crisis can become an opportunity for reinvention and a rebound. But it all depends on the honesty, patriotism, courage, and intelligence of the ruling elite. It's left for us as leaders to make Nigeria great and achieve the hope of the black continent for greatness through Nigeria. It is possible, it's doable, and this government has started it. Our job is to help them deepen and redirect and reach the destination. Thank you very much.